Welcome back in Live Now. I'm Austin Westfall. We want to get the latest on the race to the White House. One of my favorite people standing by, political analyst Rich Rubino here to break down the latest in the race and also talk about some other important angles to this as well, including the balance of power in Congress. Rich, as always, it's good to see you. Thanks for coming on. Let's get straight into it. September fundraising numbers just came out. Kamala Harris raised more than 3 times as much money as Donald Trump in September, according to a Federal Election Commission filing released on Sunday. So, Rich, Trump and Harris are basically neck and neck in battleground states. Is this a concerning statistic for the Harris camp, that she's been significantly out fundraising her opponent, but not significantly pulling ahead where it matters?
Yeah, I think actually, and this race is so status quo to the point that no matter what happens, whether it was the conventions, whether it was the presidential debate, the vice presidential debate, no matter how much money they're spending on advertising, no matter how many rallies they're having in the states, no matter how many states they're perambulating to, the fact of the matter is the polls are pretty much about the same. They're pretty much about homeostasis. They're about even, about it's coming down really to those 7 states or so, and I think we're going to be in for a very close election night. And I think that basically the entire campaign just about has been just about irrelevant.
You know, when we talk about fundraising numbers, the filing that was released yesterday says Harris headed into October with $187 million on hand. Trump's campaign ended with about $67 million fewer than Harris. He headed into October with about $120 million on hand. What are they going to be spending this money on through November 5th, Rich? Is it going to be ads, something more?
I think a lot of it will be advertisements. I don't think the advertisements have been all that effective so far, but that's certainly going to be part of it. A lot of it is going to be certainly to pay staff. Certainly a lot of it is going to be voter-to-voter type contact. A lot of it is going to be transporting people to the polls, for example, perhaps bringing people from one state to another state, bringing people from a state that's irrelevant like Massachusetts, bringing those people to a state like Pennsylvania, bringing people that are more that are perhaps the Trump campaign would bring people that are in Utah and Idaho type volunteers and bring them to a state like Arizona or Nevada. But it's really, everyone is laser focused really on 7 states and then 2 electoral votes, 1 in Nebraska, 1 in Maine, because Maine and Nebraska award their electoral votes based on congressional district rather than who wins the national popular vote. They do award 2 electoral votes to whoever wins the state, but that's really a lot of what it's going to be. And then if they have a little money left over, maybe they can perhaps give it to the senatorial campaign committee or the state legislative campaign committees as well. But my guess is they're going to spend as much money as possible on their own campaigns.
You know, Rich, we've been watching Liz Cheney making several appearances with Kamala Harris as of late, including a handful of appearances in several states today. This is her sitting down with Maria Shriver, the former First Lady of California, and Harris. They did a panel earlier today. I got to ask, former Cheney, by the way, of course, is a former congresswoman herself from Wyoming. And what she's saying at these events is that people can, quote, vote their conscience and not ever have to say a word to anybody, unquote. Cheney predicts there will be millions of Republicans who do that on Election Day. Rich, what's your feel of the situation? Could there very well be millions of Republicans out there who will vote for Harris? Does it feel like this Cheney strategy is a smart one?
Absolutely fascinating, because on the one hand, it could work that way. It could also work on the other hand. There could be a lot of voters who have told pollsters they'll vote for Trump, who are very quiet, surreptitious about it, and then they're going to vote for Trump because perhaps maybe it benefits them economically, maybe culturally they're more in sync with Donald Trump. In terms of Lynn Cheney, though, it's really kind of a delicate balancing act using her. On the one hand, you really do appeal to some of those moderate voters, specifically some of the suburban type Republicans. On the other hand, though, it can actually hurt her, I think, among the liberal base of the Democratic Party, because if you go back to certainly from 2005 to 2009, Dick Cheney, her father, was absolutely the political antichrist to many of these same liberal Democratic voters. And if you listen to the rhetoric of Jill Stein, who's the current Green Party nominee, she is very much Vice President Harris for having an endorsement of somebody whose father was one of the main architects of the Iraq War. So it can help her in one respect in the center, but contrary-wise, it can certainly perhaps have deleterious effects with some of the left-wing voters that are kind of just on the edge of whether they'll vote for Vice President Harris, vote for Stein, or stay at home.
So let's talk about the battle of the billionaires. Elon Musk has been campaigning on behalf of Trump in recent weeks. We've been seeing him do such in front of this red, white, and blue. We have also been seeing Mark Cuban. He's been out on the trail for the Harris camp as of late as well. Why are figures like this getting in the mix, Rich? Is there more to it than just their cash?
A lot of it could be potentially hubris. The idea that this idea that somehow they can affect this next election. I think it's just being in part of it, just the excitement of being out in the stump. I don't think it's necessarily that they're having some sort of a rivalry. I think Cuban is somebody who has been talked about in the past, certainly as a potential presidential candidate, as maybe running as an independent or even a Democrat. But I think at the end of the day, I don't think they're going to have that much of an effect.
Let's get to something important here. The balance of power in Congress. I want to talk about the balance of power. That'll be another hugely important story on November 5th. Control of the Senate is up for grabs, the House as well. But the Cook Political Report came out with some tough news for Democrats today. They shifted the Pennsylvania race between incumbent Democrat Senator Bob Casey and Republican challenger Dave McCormick from leaning Democrat to toss-up. Meanwhile, the Nebraska race between incumbent Republican Senator Deb Fischer and independent challenger Dan Osborne was changed from likely Republican to lean Republican. That basically means that the GOP has a slightly stronger chance of winning that Nebraska race. So we talk so much about the race to the White House, Rich, but we also got to remember that these key Senate races will impact what kind of Congress this president will have to work with. How important is the balance of power in Congress this cycle?
Yes, categorically. Of course, if any party actually wants to get significant legislation through Congress, they either have to work in a bipartisan manner or they have to garner 60 votes to break the filibuster to invoke cloture, or they can, of course, perhaps use what's called the nuclear option, manually eliminating the filibuster. But I think the Nebraska Senate race is fascinating because Nebraska is a very Republican state, one of the most ruby-red Republican states in the country. The fact that the Republicans have to spend money in Nebraska to support Deb Fischer, who should have been, certainly this should have been almost a pro forma race. It certainly takes money out of states that they should be spending it on. I think for the Democrats, there are really two races that are extremely important, and those are the two races in states where they have incumbents running in states that went for Donald Trump last time. You actually have three. The other is West Virginia, which has pretty much been written off by just about anybody in the body politic. But when it comes down to Ohio, last time around, the last two elections, Donald Trump won by about 8 points. Senator Sherrod Brown is trying to run as kind of a populist, somebody who's very much favored, very much simpatico with Donald Trump when it comes to issues like economic nationalism and free trade. On the one hand, and he's very much in a tied election. And the other race is Montana. And Montana last time went 16 points for Donald Trump in 2020. Senator John Tester, the incumbent, who's relatively popular, is trying to say that he agrees with the president on securing the borders and on the Second Amendment. But those are going to be very hard races for the Democrats to try to keep, just because there is such a limit of split ticket voting. It used to be that you would always have Republicans, someone like Charles Macias, senator from Maryland, would constantly get reelected, whereas the state of Maryland would elect Democrats for president. Now we very rarely see that, and that's really a telltale sign for the contemporaneous political climate.
The Senate will be an interesting one to follow on November 5th, that's for sure. The Democrats have a lot more to defend than the Republicans do that night, that's for sure. Rich, as always, we appreciate seeing you. We'll be checking in soon. See you soon.
Can't wait, absolutely.
All right.